Look, I remember a couple of years ago, I was in hospital for a long stretch, and when I came back on air, I said the first thing I would address would be energy policy, because both parties on energy policy are writing a national economic suicide note. As Bjorn Lomborg, a formidable authority, has said on this program, the Paris Agreement will be the most expensive treaty in history, and that Biden's climate alarmism is, quote, almost entirely wrong. You've got this bloke, Richard Marles, the deputy leader of the Labor Party, saying in approaching net zero emissions of carbon dioxide, agriculture won't be excused. Where does the farmer fit in? Every cow emits about 2,300 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent every year. Labor's Marles says agriculture won't be excluded. Look, I'll be saying this until I'm blue in the face. As one of my listeners says, we can't change the climate, but we have to change the climate of public opinion. In a zero carbon dioxide emissions world, there can be no diesel buses, no oil-powered cruise liners or jet aircraft, except the ones, I suppose, that fly these indulged IPCC bureaucrats to climate conferences. There are 7.8 billion people in the world. We emit carbon dioxide. What happens to us? A zero emissions policy will decimate mining, farming, forestry, fishing and tourism. It's a national economic suicide note. And when I ask, as I did the other night, is the problem carbon dioxide? Well, how much of it is there hanging around? Politicians can't tell me. I've written about this in tomorrow's Sydney Daily Telegraph, which you can also read in Brisbane's Courier Mail and the Gold Coast Bulletin. I've spoken to Matt Canavan and Joel Fitzgibbon. But we've got a fight on our hands. Barnaby Joyce and Matt Canavan co-authored a piece a couple of weeks ago. It was outstanding. Matt Canavan and Barnaby Joyce were right when they wrote, quote, Australian politics is obsessed with a target to achieve net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. In relation to the inability of Australia and Australians to sensibly debate the future of coal, I can't get anyone to debate it, or a responsible energy policy, they wrote correctly about current climate politics having, quote, many quasi-religious aspects, absolute beliefs that tolerate no dissent, every word accepted as sacred and underwritten with hellish climate damnation if not adhered to. Amusingly but tellingly, they wrote that current policy from both sides, quote, requires people to speak to you from the other side, as many of the politicians and the commentators talking about a 2050 aspiration will be dead by then. Of course, the issue is coal. Barnaby Joyce joins me. Barnaby, thank you for your time. I mean, the other night on my program, Joel Fitzgibbon described climate change as about item 11 on the list of real issues. The viewer comments I received from the segment were unbelievable. And some of them, Annalise, for example, said, just check what is happening in Houston right now. What a fiasco. No power, ice cold temperatures, no power and another freezing storm tonight. Terry says most of the Bunnings products are made in China and they use Australian coal for manufacturing like we used to. Now all the jobs and profits from those goods go to China. Barnaby, what will, here we are, McCormack and Co. do about this?
Well, I think it's really important that we understand that the biggest problem before us at the moment is not climate change. It is the advent of a new superpower, which is run by a tyrannical regime in Beijing, and that's the rise of China and the possible removal or the possible slip of the power of the United States and the Western Pacific. And what we should be doing for our children and our grandchildren is making our nation as strong as we humanly possibly can, because no one is going to care if they dominate you, but you say, but we are carbon net zero or carbon neutral. Our job is to make this nation as powerful as we can, to understand that our manufacturing has slid, to understand that we must expand our agricultural capacity, to understand that we have a massive gross debt and we must get on top of it, because any crisis in the future has to be able to be paid for as well. And this sort of, as I said, when you're trying to debate the climate issue, it is like going up as some sort of heretic in a new temple, because you are held out as the absolute sort of bane of all disaffection, because you dare to question the zeitgeist. You dare to say, look, I'm not going to accept this chapter and verse. I'm not going to put my nation in a place that makes it less able to deal with what really is the major issues that are before it.
But you
climate
see,
change might be an issue, but it ain't nowhere on the book.
In the piece I've written tomorrow, I quote all these scientists who agree with what you're saying. Scientists, internationally acclaimed scientists. No one is prepared to read them in government. Now, the damage is already done because, pardon me, environmental powers were given by the Commonwealth to the states, and farmers have had their land confiscated, haven't they?
Well, it was, you know, and even if you're not on the land, unless you abide by socialism and believe that's a fair form of government, with all the tragedy that is created throughout humanity, remember this, in your nation, in Australia, they divested a private asset of private individuals, being the vegetation rights. They own the trees. They borrowed money. They owed money to the bank. But overnight, they were divested without payment for so-called community benefit. Now, when you divest an asset off the individual and vest it in the community without payment, there is a word for that. It's called communism. And it does not work. If the community really want an asset, then the community must be prepared to pay for that asset. And if you stand by and let one section of your community have their assets divested off them and say, well, there's a moral good for that, then it's only a matter of time before someone devises a moral good for a private asset to be divested off you, whether it's through your super fund or wherever, your home. So we have to, on our side of politics, say, no, we don't tolerate this. Now, where they're going to go next, the IPCC in South Korea has said it has to be methane emissions from bovine ruminants, from cattle. And now, even around this building, even within the coalition, the whispers are, it's farting cows we have to deal with. That's their words, farting cows, that we have to deal with. And I listened to Professor Peter Wynne, and he was saying, well, you're not going to get it from sequestration, or people out there saying, oh, well, soil carbon's how we're going to do it. No, they're not. They have to do it by emissions reduction, and methane at 80 times the effect of what carbon emissions have is where they're going to go, and farmers should be aware of that.
Absolutely. But as you say, I mean, for people in the city, emissions from people living in the cities have gone up during the past 30 years, but their moral guilt 30%. Is eased by sending the bill to the bush.
That's right. There's an equation when they say net zero. The negative has to come somewhere because the emissions in the city are going up. So how do they make this equation work? Well, they look around and they go, the country, the vegetation, the cattle, the dairy cows.
That's it. Well, I just want to make that point about cattle so that our viewers can understand. Our cows. A cow emits 2,300 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent gases a year.
That's correct.
Richard Marles, the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party, says as we pursue zero carbon dioxide emissions, agriculture won't be excluded. Where does the farmer go?
That's correct. That's correct. And so we have to be aware of this because sometimes people think, oh, well, the National Party have the capacity to stop this. If the Liberal Party and the Labor Party get their heads together, then that's it. It's gone through. And so that's why there has to be a contrarian view, because we also believe in democracy.
There has to be
the voice of a contrarian view, which is the view of so many people, that's dead right. And people must stand behind what they, of course. And now well, they're just going to walk us into this process.
But they want to silence you.
But
Barnaby, they want to silence you, silence Matt Canavan, silence me, and all the scientists that I quote in my stories tomorrow. Completely ignore, agree with the people who are paid to tell the government what they want to hear. Barnaby, we've got to keep talking about it. Go on.
Yeah, and right at the same time, look what they're doing to our economy. ANZ won't refinance the port of Newcastle.
That's it.
What is going on here? That they are making decisions about our nation's biggest export, whether you like it or not, fossil fuels. I mean, this has really got to be pulled into gear. We are really, Altona closing down, Vales Point not being expanded, Liddell closing down. We've had blackouts in Manly, had blackouts in Hunters Hill. Look what's happening in America. That's how well renewables work. They froze and the lights went out.
Good on you.
No,
Good
come
on you. Keep at it. Keep at it. We will. Together, we'll get there, Barnaby. Good to talk to you. Isn't he great?